Welcome to Dark Loops Productions, Surviving the Last of Us. I'm Dr. Scott Jordan, aka Zombie Scotty, cognitive psychologist, philosopher at Illinois State University.
And I'm Dr. Leandra Parris, Associate Dean and Director of Diversity and Inclusion for the School of Ed at William & Mary. And today we're going to talk about episode 3 of The Last of Us, Long, Long Time.
Damn, was that an episode or what? Oh, my goodness. I got to tell you what, I remember all of us were podcasting Lovecraft Country a couple of years ago. And I don't know if you remember 1921 Rewind, episode 9, where I wore a suit and tie because I thought it was kind of a sacred episode. I just felt that this one was kind of a sacred episode for the LGBTQ plus community. I mean, I think that this one and how they handled love in such a short bit of screen time was just stunning. So joining us on the show today, the one, the only Dr. Stanford Carpenter. Stanford, please tell everybody a little something about who you are and what you do.
Hello, I'm Dr. Stanford Carpenter. I'm a cultural anthropologist coming to you out of Chicago, Illinois.
Fantastic. Also on the show with us today, Miss Cianna Greaves. Cianna, welcome, and please tell everybody a little something about who you are and what you do.
Hi, my name is Cianna Greaves. I'm a radio producer and journalist. I write about pop culture, food, TV, and I am coming to you from Chicago, Illinois.
Fantastic. So the way the show runs here on Surviving the Last of Us, I open the floor to favorite scene, favorite line, favorite whatever, and we have a conversation. So who'd like to open? I guess we should let our guests. Favorite line, favorite scene, favorite character.
I would say my favorite scene was when they're it's at the beginning when they're kind of walking along the post-apocalyptic landscape and we find out that someone's never flown in a plane, and what I thought was really interesting about that is it just drove home, how much of a break the apocalypse was, that there's an entire generation of people who have never flown on planes, never been in cars. But not only that, but don't even understand the concept of a restaurant, right? This idea of this place that you go to, like a lot of the things that we take for granted in terms of commerce, we don't see that. We haven't seen that in the episodes that we've had so far. So yes, I that was one of my favorite elements, in that they brought up something that we really don't see enough in these types of films, which is that when you have that type of break in society, that when things shut down, it also means that people are shut out of the experience.
Yeah. I mean, the thing about the other big zombie series, Walking Dead, was that it was all pretty much real time. I mean, Rick woke up after a few weeks and then you just followed them. And for me, one of the most interesting things about Walking Dead was the Whisperers, and he didn't get those till 7 or 8 years into the series, right? Whereas this one, you just do a 20-year time jump, and now you get to do all this backstory. That's really quite good. And that scene where they're coming across the airport, you can tell it's a wee tad of an info dump, right? I mean, they're trying to explain the world to you, yet it does feel organic in their character relationship between the two of them. So I think he's doing a good job of being grim and having that come right through the screen.
And she's doing a good job of go ahead. Of bringing in the awe of it. Like, I love that moment because she says, dude, you flew in the sky. Like, we take for granted the things that we're able to do in today's society. And she's like, when she experiences the video game and just the whole,
yes.
So I love that point too, but I think it was nice to also have that reminder of the magic it must seem to someone like Ellie that you flew. Like, what are you being grim about? Like, you had the opportunity to do that. So
go ahead, Cianna.
I agree. I like the reminder portion of it. I really appreciate this 20-year time jump. When you had a Walking Dead, you went from, the way we live very slowly to the way we live now. And it was like, the first few years where I miss cable, I miss driving, I miss this, I miss that. And I really enjoyed this 20-year time jump and just really being immersed into the way we live now.
Yeah. And then the way they're again, he tells the backstory of how it happened. He tells it to us while he's telling it to her. And, it goes back to Leandra's comment about, oh my God, it's in the food, right? After that episode, the second episode where they mentioned that they found it in the flour in the factory or whatever. Who else? Favorite line, favorite scene, favorite character?
Sorry.
No,
I liked Bill. I thought Nick Overman did an amazing job with Bill. He was definitely my favorite character of this episode. I enjoyed that very, very beginning scene where he is really, immersed in his prepping. I mean, that's prepping done right.
That is not prepping 101.
Right.
That's graduate
he
school prepping.
Literally thought of everything down to, grabbing cases of Camus from his local grocery store. You know what I mean? He wasn't going to survive on canned beans and free, which none of us want to, you know what I mean? And it's, I don't know, it spoke to I think the overarching theme of this entire episode of it's not just about surviving. It's how you live and how you choose to live your life with warmth, hurt, and with love. And those things are important.
Yeah, very important.
I did love that because I was like, ooh, when you're seeing it at the beginning, like today we'd be like, that person is like out of touch with reality, right? Like people would like make fun of that person. And I think in this timeline, that person is a genius. That person is the smartest person in the room. And we got to humanize. I mean, I think a lot of people poke fun at survivalists, but it kind of humanizes that these are people who have very rich lives and backstories. And like, I just loved like turning it around to where like this person has it down.
Yeah.
And survive. And not only are they going to survive, they're going to pair their wine and their rabbit, and it's going to work. And it's gonna
Exactly. There's all kinds of things about people we don't know. Right. And we take our little narrative on them and we act like that's what they are. Yeah.
I think it also hits really different post-COVID or
it does.
2 or 3 years into COVID, right?
Yeah.
Because like Leandra said, I think we all might have had a stereotype of what a survivalist looked like, what they believed prior to COVID. And now I would consider myself to be somewhat of a survivalist, having experienced lockdown and, not having access to food, being worried about getting medicine, not being able to source like just basic supplies for myself and my family. It was really, really scary time.
Yeah, people were developing their survivalist skills when they were hoarding toilet paper at the beginning of the pandemic. Right?
They sure were.
I bet you Costco's going through the roof since then, right? It's just people buying everything. Stanford, you were going to say something.
A lot of this leads into what I thought was the funniest line, which was when Frank and Bill were arguing, and Frank was like, the government's not just all a bunch of Nazi jackfruit thugs. And then Bill was like, they are. And he's like, well, not back then.
I so loved the fact that they used Frank. They presented Frank, and it brought things out in Bill that we would have never seen, right? If it hadn't been Frank there to say those things. And I appreciate the fact that Frank was sincere when he said they weren't Nazis before, because Bill's in this survivalist world where they are Nazis, and it's clear, from the first time we meet him that they're authoritarian thugs. And even before there's a pandemic, he's making sure he's not going to be brought down by the government. Frank's not doing that pre-outbreak. He's living his life, doing the things that he does. And so I appreciated they cared about each other so much that they could stay in that space and disagree. And I loved Frank pushing Bill's edges and Bill pushing Frank's edges. I think that I really appreciated that line.
Well, what was also nice about it was I didn't get the sense that they were trying to make Frank morally superior, and that's something that's something I've been noticing a lot in some of these stories, and is that sometimes it's like you bring in characters with different viewpoints and they try and make it so that one is seen as like the truth and the other one isn't. And this was just kind of like, well, the fact that they came together as a couple, the fact that they were able to navigate those differences actually recontextualizes sort of the moral weight of those differences. And I like that like it was, that Frank truly needed Bill to survive. But at the same time, Frank brought in some things that Bill needed as well.
Mm-hmm. No, I think you're absolutely right. And I really like your statement that a lot of these current apocalypse narratives really do moralize quite a bit. And I appreciate the lack of moralizing that's going on in this story from top to bottom, right? And it's not like the world is bad because it went this way, right? It's not like we screwed up. That's not what people are talking about now. People are surviving now. They're adapting to their context. And I think that's a much more pragmatic way to tell the apocalypse, right? Because you're going to find these people that you would think are opposites in a moral worldview who just end up getting along because of things that are much deeper than any thoughts we have about what morality is.
Absolutely. Even just the concept of having friends over for dinner.
Yes.
Bill was like, what?
So, Bill wasn't having friends over for dinner before the apocalypse. Like, now he actually gets to do that. Like,
oh my God. So given everything we're talking about, I'm going to jump to my favorite scene. I don't remember any of the words. It was just brilliant, and I laugh out loud every time it happens, and almost to the point of tears. And that's after you have this wonderful sort of seduction scene at the piano, and then they end up in bed together. And the very next scene, 3 years later, and Frank is running out of the house screaming, "But this is my house too!" And they're arguing like a couple that truly loves each other. And I love it when cinema doesn't present arguing as a bad aspect of a relationship. Right? Because I'm sorry, but y'all got to fight for who you are. And one of the values of a good love is that you could get to continue fighting for who you are. And doing that in that safe space of that belief that you're going to stay together is so fundamental to, I would argue, adult life. I just laughed. I cried. I thought, good for them. They go immediately from their first time making love to the argument that's inevitably going to follow 3 years later. I just got to add, whenever I think of it, I hear that SpongeBob voice, 3 years later. I don't know.
I love it too, because in that fight, he says, "Let me love it my way." And then later asks Bill, "Love me the way I want you to." And so the very idea too, in that argument of like, let me show my love the way and there's like a lot around that in terms of like acceptance and what love really is and how it can be expressed in so many different ways. So I just love that. I love that he pushes Bill to see that love isn't like this one thing that you just come in and do. Like, it is work, it's expression. Anyway.
And he has absolutely no fear that Bill is going to shoot him. I mean, that's the thing. Yeah. Bill is sitting there ready to shoot Joel. He's got the gun on the table, and Joel says, "By the way, get that gun out of my face." Right? So Frank trusts and loves Bill so much that he'll yell at him and not at all fearing that he's going to be shot. And I thought that, by the way, I don't know the name of the actor who played Frank, but I suspect we're going to see a lot more of this guy. That was unbelievably buoyant, open, free, it didn't look like he was working to act at all. It was just all there. It was
His
incredible.
name is Murray Bartlett, and he starred in the first season of White Lotus, which
I was just about to say, so
you should say it.
Yes, we watched the first season of White Lotus right before starting this. And so then when this episode popped up, I was like,
all right.
Like,
another reason.
Totally different people.
He is an excellent actor. Like,
that's fantastic. I look forward to anybody else on the 3 years later scene.
I guess everybody probably felt this way, but it really took a while for me to warm up to Frank. Because I was waiting for him to shoot Bill.
Same here.
I feel like, okay, so this guy, I didn't necessarily believe that he was actually gay. I I felt like this was somebody, as soon as you mentioned Baltimore, I was like, oh, the con is on. He's gonna do whatever he needs to do to, I wouldn't want to leave.
Yeah.
Shower, have some venison, and then be on my way.
Yeah.
I honestly thought this was a con job and that Bill was going to end up dead or in a basement.
I tell you, go ahead.
And no hate to Baltimore. It's a little dig. I lived there forever.
But the con is on.
Say the same thing because in the video game, Frank does betray Bill, like takes off with a battery and then ends up dying by suicide when he gets bit. So like that's what I came in expecting. So when he was like, I'm gonna like stay like for 3 days or whatever, like I really thought we were gonna go into more like an abusive relationship sort of scene or something. And then when that didn't happen, like I was kind of like, oh, it's this kind of show. Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, like,
I tell you what, they made a very conscious choice at that piano scene, you know, for Bill to actually sit down and play with Frank standing behind him.
Yes.
You know, in that moment, you knew this is not, there's something going on in Bill that is not. I was like,
don't do it, Bill.
I mean,
for sure.
You're waiting for Frank to strangle him or something. And so they made that choice. And I thought it was a little awkward that Bill would actually trust anybody to be behind him for that long at that point. So,
well, when he was bringing him clothes, when Frank was in the shower, open that door, come out with a gun, shoot Bill in the face.
Right. I mean,
take over his home. Yeah, I was convinced that Frank was a bad one.
You know, you know what? You're making these points that you're making are like the writers knew exactly what they were doing. Like Leandra, as a game player, they were violating your expectations. You know, me, not as a game player, but, you know, given what they said about Bill originally, violating my expectations about him having sit down and play the piano and all this crash. Eventually, we witnessed this unbelievably beautiful description of a relationship. So it's masterful. Absolutely masterful. Any other favorite scenes, lines, characters?
So since we're on that, with it turning into a love story, not a horror story like I was expecting, my favorite scene is actually at the end where Frank is sitting down at dinner and it's their last one, and he looks around and there's like plants everywhere. And so if you could contrast that with the first one where like there's no life in that room, there's dust everywhere. Like you really see the life that Frank brought to Bill and like how love really just made it all worth it. It wasn't sterile. It wasn't this dusty, rundown, bare minimum. Like there's life everywhere when you see through that montage. And then this didn't hit me at first, so I have got to give credit to Raul, my husband's friend, who pointed this out. But when they put the rings on their fingers, get married, because this happened in 2003, they never experienced legalized, same-sex marriage. So they've never known what it's like to have that federally protected right to get married. And now they're doing it right there at the end. And like, I just, for some reason, sitting back in that and being like, you talked about the airplane earlier, and like, I get really down on all the things we've lost in the last 3 years. And that is, we have to voice that. We have to acknowledge that. And I sometimes forget the gains that came before that as well. So just that whole moment was just beautiful. And then when I went back and watched it after realizing that, it just sits a lot heavier. That in this world, it took an apocalypse for them to be able to do that. And that was just it just hit differently.
Yeah,
it also speaks to,
go ahead, Cianna.
Piggybacking off of what Leandra says, thinking about the things that we lost. I know for me, the lack of in-person, face-to-face human contact was really, really rough. Really rough. And to see this story coming off of this, time of such solitude, of just how important it is to have companionship, and to build social networks. And that relationship with Joel and Tess, as we see, really was probably one of the more important relationships. in Joel's life. You know, their relationship also benefited Joel and Tess, and I'm sure was paramount to their survival up until this point, and continues. I mean, they have their car.
Right.
They were able to get food. I mean, it's huge.
Yeah.
So yeah, I thought it was a really good reflection on just the importance and power of human companionship and how important these like interdependent relationships really are.
No, I love what you're saying, and
no man is an island.
Exactly. And Bill's decision at the end, right? I thought that the development of agency in Bill because of his relationship with Frank is something we don't talk about enough. In other words, we act as if our choices are our own, and we never talk about the kind of choices that come to our life because we're in a committed relationship, right? There are different things I do in my life because I've been married to my wife as long as I have, and our love and our life, and it just changes. It's the choices I make. Yes. At the same time, it's like I'm no longer making my choices. I'm making our choices in the sense that I'm not deciding for her, but it's like we're in a jazz band together. Okay. And I can't just go off on a different beat. There are things that come to my life because I'm on stage with other people, choices that we can make because we're together. And I love the fact that a survivalist decided to commit suicide. I shouldn't say I love that. Careful on that. But you know what I'm after. Frank's presence in Bill's life gave Bill a whole different palette of choices and values. And I first thought he was lying. I first thought that he wanted Frank to believe that they were going to die together, and then Frank would not. But the way they presented it's not the case. So I just thought, damn, yes. I don't advocate suicide, please. It's not what I'm doing. What I'm saying is that there were choices that came to who Bill was because of his love and life with Frank that we just don't talk about because we're still quite often stuck on, yeah, but it's my choice and blah, 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 blah. So I'll shut up there. That was very informative and brilliantly done.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like what you said earlier about, you know,
You're muted, Cianna. Let me just
like what you were saying before about being in committed relationships and having arguments and really fighting for who you are. I feel like Frank and Bill just being in a committed relationship, fighting for who you are. I think Frank and Bill really ended up striking such a perfect balance, right? There was the softness that Frank brought to the relationship at that one scene where when the house was under siege. Yes. I mean, that was pretty intense.
It was.
That was definitely all Bill. He definitely
Bill's moment, man.
But he really never let his guard down. Frank didn't change him. While he opened him up to new experiences, he didn't change who he was. He was still incredibly cautious. He was still, suspicious, and in the long run, that definitely ended up saving their lives. He did such a great job. That is really good. Yeah. That is, nobody's coming into this house that I don't want coming into this house.
Exactly. I'll just say that the letter where he says, Joel, I never really liked you, but I do respect you. The world needs people like us. Oh my goodness. I love that line. And it's another example of this show not moralizing at us. Like you said, Stanford, that there's one worldview that's somehow better than the rest of them. These two guys survived because they combine their worldviews, in ways that mutually enhance each other instead of, you're wrong. And then assuming one's got to be the boss. And in the end, that's how groups actually stay together. Did I interrupt you, Stanford?
Nope.
Oh, okay.
No, I thought that I have to say, I thought that there was a lot of really interesting stuff that came out of him being a survivalist, but there's one thing that kind of got to me, which was I didn't see how one or two people could hold a town like that.
Yeah.
That was a little, because the thing is, a town is big enough to attract a lot of people.
People might not know your house is on the map, where your house is on the map. People might not know your house exists, but a town,
Yeah.
People know that town is there.
So you think, I mean, because again, Leandra, you've played the game. The game doesn't involve those kind of moments between Frank and Bill, right? So they had to, I think, one of the lines they got out of, Bill and Frank living together and putting up the gate and blah, blah, was Joel telling Bill, okay, look, they're going to come at night. They're going to cut through your fence. They're going to get through your stuff. And then, Bill says, we'll be all right. But that's kind of equating Joe. They use that to equate Bill and Joel's character, right? These are both survivors, killers. So I don't know, maybe they were doing it that way, but I don't disagree. You have to assume that somehow no roads led to that town or something along those lines, so they wouldn't be found accidentally. I have no idea.
But it was, what I also thought was interesting is this whole idea of having the time jump, and instead of focusing on people about to die, like we're actually focusing on the people who are lasting, the people who've kind of figured something out, right? Mm-hmm. Which to me is what makes this show a little more interesting. And this is coming from someone who watched the entire series of Walking Dead, right? Is that once you start having that, once you start factoring things like, if you're 15 years old, right? If you're 15 years old and this happened even like 5 years ago, like you don't have memories of a society anything like our society. And so I'm really curious to see how that element plays out. Because much of our life right now, to anybody living in that world, would just be a distant fairy tale.
Yes.
And not just the bad, but not just the good, but also the bad as well, right? Mm-hmm. I find I also found it interesting that in this episode, we only saw like one creature.
Yeah.
And that actually rung kind of true to me, because I'm like, at a certain point, you start to run out of bodies to take over,
yeah.
right? Like, and you got to figure out what the next thing, like what is going to be the next host for this thing. I don't think it's going to be humans, because, well, we saw what the humans even did to themselves, like the humans killing other humans just so that there'd be less people to get infected, right? I actually really appreciated that scene as well, because what it showed was that there was like a bigger logic in place where people were really thinking about, like, how do we stop this? How, and even making some really grim choices. It's not the choice I would make, but that's the choice. That's one of the things that I could really imagine in a situation like that.
The beginning of episode 2, the doctor says, bomb the city now.
Yeah.
Right? She just says, bomb the city now. And she's not shooting them, so it feels a little less individualistic, like shooting people like Joel got shot, right? In the very first episode, right? He was not infected, but nonetheless, they said shoot him anyway. Yeah, it's interesting decisions that come around.
I think that's a really interesting description too. Like, our species is so self-destructive that it would be eventually the fungi would give up.
Went through that system. Next. No. And by the way, I went and I watched that ant video you mentioned in our first discussion, Leandra. Basically, it gets into the ant's brain and it makes it climb up. And then what it does is it climb. Why would it climb up? It's probably actually following the sun, to be honest. It's probably more something like heliotropic, if that's the right word. It just follows the sun, the heat that's on its body, and then it sticks its mandibles in the tree and then becomes mold food, right? And things, it was just terrifying.
Yeah.
Yeah, that happens too. Yes. And then that they showed other ants grabbing him and throwing him off the tree. It's unbelievable. Unbelievable.
Like, no, not today, sir. Not today. There's another one where they actually go through like the different phases, and one of them is the ant becomes a bit of a stalker. And so it's just weird. It's really weird.
No, that's creepy as hell. Yeah, yeah.
I will say, did this episode so early in the series?
Oh, you're a little surprised?
Probably would have been, but more of a traditionalist, like this is a great season 2, episode 1 episode.
Right.
You know, after we have a massive cliffhanger, you know, just an opportunity for the audience to just take a beat. I felt like it was just a little too soon. It kind of took me out of the story. I wasn't too keen on it watching it until I kind of made my peace with like, okay, we're not getting
no monsters today.
episode. Like this is like a straight love story, which was great.
Yeah.
But
you figure that probably had more to do with where they were in the game?
Yeah, so and I would agree too. Like normally this is something that I would expect like a penultimate episode or like coming off a cliffhanger is like a kind of like it gives you a little bit of like hints as to what happened in the cliffhanger, right?
Right.
And at this point, the one thing I will say I like about the adaptation is it's true to like Bill's role. Like Bill's entire role in the video game is to get you a truck. That's it. Like the side story of like Frank betraying him and like all that, like it's still true to that. And not that Frank doesn't betray him in the show, but you know what I mean? Like
for sure.
Literally
we could have come back to this.
Yeah.
We could have come back to this later. You could have gotten the truck.
They get
come
the truck
back and then like, oh, by the way, Bill.
Yeah. So like that's
like
the whole purpose is, and I think it's actually, I agree. Like normally I would want to see that in a different place. It was nice to be like, instead of Bill being this like, because he is gay in the video game and it's not clear, like Frank hates him. Frank leaves a note and is basically, I'm choosing to do this because I can't stand to be around you anymore. So it went from this really sad, isolated person in the middle of the city who helps you get a truck to someone who still helps you get a truck, but has love. And so that difference I really appreciate. But I do wonder if they're tied into like, they're really fixing like, Bill gets you the truck. Right.
Right. I wonder how much, I also wonder how much they were counting on the audience is not going to expect this in episode 3. And so we want to shock them with a love episode. Because the internet blew up, right? And I don't know. I don't know if it would have blown up as much if it were like episode 8 or 9 as a flashback or something.
I did not understand this because this is not the first time we've seen LGBTQ plus on screen.
Like the Magicians did a whole episode too.
Yeah, I was not sure why people were like, oh my God, I was hysterically crying. Were you?
Well,
were you really crying? It was a beautiful episode and a great story.
I can see why, in terms of usually that type of story does come later, and it has this feeling of being kind of almost an afterthought, as opposed to a forethought. You know, and being this early kind of embeds this relationship into the beginning of the story, as opposed to it being something where it's like, oh yeah, by the way, right? And that was something that after, once I saw the interplay, I thought that was something that kind of crossed my mind of like, oh, when does matter? Usually, if you think about it, they, like I said, these stories come later. They come when they've burned through a lot of the obvious plots. I just think that I think that having it, that a big part of the reaction was having it in the 3rd episode. We're gonna put this at the beginning. We're gonna make this part of the origin of the story, right? And I thought that I felt that way for sure.
And we're gonna shock you with love, right? Because I'm just like, what? Who What are you doing letting him stand behind you while you play the piano? What the hell is going on?
Well, like after playing the video game, when you find out like Frank really did want Bill to die, I was like, oh, here it comes. Like, and I will say, I think, and they could have done this other way. There's so many ways they could have done this. Like, one of the things that I don't think would have sat as well if they did it later was that letter where he brings up Tess. Because if they had waited longer, the effect of losing Tess wouldn't have felt as strong, I think. Right. And so that last piece of like, and you need to protect Tess, and you guys should like do da-da-da. I don't think that would have hit as hard later on. Yeah. Of course, they could have found other ways to bring that moment back. Because to me, I feel like Joel really hasn't processed that Tess is gone.
No. I don't know. I feel the opposite. I think maybe a more opportunity to flesh out that relationship more. I don't know, as someone who was not a game player. This is only the third episode. I don't know that much about Tess and Joel's relationship.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah.
More flashbacks.
As a viewer who's not played the game, she almost feels like she's just filling a space left by his daughter.
Which is kind of how it is in the game. So yeah, you don't need to play the game to know that.
So
warm body, and not necessarily like a great, love story in its own right. So, I mean, maybe if they had given us this episode later, given us some more flashbacks about Bill and Joel, more flashbacks on Joel and Tessa's relationship, I think it might have been more impactful, but I could also just be dead inside.
No, I think one of the big
things, that's what it is.
I think you're right there. I think I just
blown off in this episode. What happened?
I actually agree with you. I think that the show would be better for having Tess last longer, so we could actually feel it when she dies. Like she dies like a rando.
Real talk.
I would bet that they are going to bring her back more. I think what they got out of this episode was the moment at the end where Joel says to Ellie, okay, I will take you and you're going to do what I say. And he says A, B, and C. And there's not a moment of smartassery. Mm-hmm. In other words, Joel lays down the law with her in a way that's calm and deliberate that we've not seen. And I thought they sort of solidified the difference between them in age and experience. And I thought the fact that he had lost Tess came up in the letter. I thought that gave a gravitas to the moment where I got to do this. I'm going to do this for Tess. Right. Mm-hmm. So I thought that's what they were really getting at episode, at least for Tess and Ellie, or for Joel and Ellie, was to get to the point where he could say that to her clearly, and then to take that through the rest of the series. So I do think they're going to bring Tess back, and I think we're going to see their relationship in flashbacks, which probably didn't happen in the game.
No,
I would hope so.
So what'd you guys think of the strawberry scene? I love the strawberry scene. I thought the moment that Bill bit into that strawberry and almost started cry laughing, that was just stunningly good acting. It felt completely spontaneous. To the point where it was simply delightful. I'll say that. Anyone else?
Yeah, so Nick Offerman, really, that I agree. Like, he's such a good actor. And it reminded me of my husband and I did like a 3-day juicing thing because we fell for one of those fads. And I remember like giving up after like a day and a half, and I had an apple for the first time and it tasted so good. Like, having not ate anything for a day and a half. So I can't imagine going however many years it was without tasting something like that and then tasting it for the first time. I mean, it was sweet. Did I need it? I don't think so, but like, it was sweet. And it was well acted.
It kind of grossed me out.
What? Why did it gross you out, man?
Here we are watching a horror film where it's basically fungus takes over the world, and I'm looking at it like humans' heads are blowing up into mushrooms, and I'm thinking to myself, I'm not eating anything that's not cooked. I'm looking. I looked at that scene. I thought to myself, well, damn, what's in that strawberry? Like that was my first thought, right? Because like fungus, bacteria, it led up like we're basically it is the plant world eating up all the meat, right? And so like this idea that you're just gonna like eat a raw plant didn't. And then also with the knowledge that it was a contamination or the theory that it's a contamination of the food supply that gets you, I'm cooking it. I'm cooking it. I don't care what it is. I am lighting it under. I will eat. I'm on a diet of ash. It's strawberry ash. It's corn. It's wheat.
There you go.
Well, I'm only laughing because I see this as an absolute reality. I'd be like, it's fine, right?
Yeah, good.
Absolutely not. Barbecue it.
Look, sauteed strawberries have to be a thing. Like I'm sure someone out there has done this.
Jam.
Also, the fungi is like growing in the ground and connecting globally or like across stuff. So now I'm wondering, like, how did they keep the fungus from growing into the town if it was coming out of the ground in other places? Does that make sense? They don't have scenes that like sleeps out.
Is it coming out of the ground in other places? I don't think we're there yet. I don't know that.
Well, like there's that one scene in Boston where like you see the little sprouts come out of the ground and touch one of the people to like communicate the tests in them.
Oh, okay.
So like,
my take on
how did they keep it out?
My take was that the stuff that came out of the ground in that episode was a fungus infrastructure that connected infected pods. So you have a clump here, and they reach out and join up. And so it didn't seem to me like it was just, going everywhere. It was
like actual fungi who take up acres and acres of land. And
I think they probably send it out, but then they don't have enough energy to just perpetually send stuff out.
Yeah.
When they run into something that connects or feeds them, then they'll solidify that.
Maybe those parts may be edible without like having you converted it into something.
You don't know, man.
I'm cooking it.
I'm never eating a mushroom the same way again.
Right?
There you go. So we do a section on the show where we talk about playing the game. Leandra, you had said that you were playing the game along with each episode. Did that happen this week?
It did. Yeah. I think I talked about it throughout the episode today where like it was kind of weird because the game does not follow the Bill story the way the show does. So I actually didn't know where to stop. So I just played through. It's a lot scarier. There's a lot more stuff. Like I said, you find out that Frank hated Bill and chose to die by suicide over than like deal with him once he was bitten. And was like going to steal his battery. It was like a whole thing. So very, very different vibe. Very different vibe. That serves the game, but I actually don't think would have served the show well at all. Like it just would have been too much of a downer. But it's cool. You get to drive a truck, and now that we've talked though, I'm thinking about what you said, Stanford. How does Ellie in the video game know how to drive a truck? Because she does end up having to drive it, and she can pop a clutch. So how does she know how to do all of that?
Well, she ground a bit of clutch for a while, and then she.
Anyway, so that's my thoughts on the game where it's at. I got to the point where we have the truck, and I'm just assuming that that's where I should have stopped. So again, that was like the whole point, right? Get the truck.
Well, I'll tell you what. I got to the point in the beginning of the game where you get out into the town, and I'm stuck in a basement. And there are 3 infected in the basement, and I haven't figured out how to get by them. And my friend Tom Buller was watching me, and I got sick of him laughing at me dying. So I turned it off for the evening. I don't think I'm ever going to catch up with the show, but if I can, I will. It's fun, but it's also anxiety provoking. So I want to relax but anyway, I'll play it and see where we go from there.
Yeah, I mean, I will say one thing true with the game is they do not, like some games give you way too many supplies. And you're like, there's no way you would have just randomly picked up a machete on this place.
Right.
The game does a good job of like, you never have enough supplies ever.
2 bullets and 3 zombies, man.
Right. And then when you do find them, they're in like bathrooms or warehouses where like, or like places where you would actually expect to find.
That's
so I will give the game that credit. But yeah, if y'all could like give us more supplies and go back to like just suspending reality for a little bit and give me ammo, that'd be great. Thanks.
No, fantastic. So why don't we go ahead and tell everyone where we can find us on social media, and we will start with Stanford.
Yes, you can find me on Facebook, Twitter, at SW Carpenter.
Fantastic. How about you, Cianna?
You can find me on Twitter at CC Greaves. That's CICIGREAVES.
Awesome. How about you, Leandra?
You can find me on Twitter at Parris Leandra, at PARRIS Leandra.
Fantastic. You can find all episodes of Surviving The Last of Us on YouTube at Dark Loops Productions. If you want to write in, send an email to darkloopsproductions@gmail.com. We'll be sure to read it at the end of our next episode. You can also leave comments on this YouTube page. So there it is. From all of us to all of you, big hugs. And remember, cook your damn food. Bye-bye.